So what I'd like to do now on the next slide is talk a little bit about the evidence that Bostrom offers in support of P1, P2, and P3, since that is an important part of deciding whether or not we should agree with the premises or disagree with the premises. So the first premise is supported basically just by optimistic views of the likely future of technological development. Those who think that probably artificial intelligence systems will improve in their powers, and that human ability to marshal resources for complex computations is likely to continue to improve, perhaps improve exponentially, as Kurzweil sometimes describes it. If we believe that, then we're predicting something like a singularity or posthumanism, or what's sometimes called transhumanism, a point in the future when our ability to do things like run enormous simulations that are as complex as, for instance, what we are experiencing now in our day-to-day life, that is a reasonable prediction from those kind of optimistic extrapolations from contemporary technologies. The second premise is, and that's questionable, okay? So you might be less optimistic than that about the development of technology. You might be more skeptical that technologies would be able to develop to the point that simulations as real as what we experience in our day-to-day life could be generated. The second premise relies on a few things. One, a sense of human nature, that we are explorers, that we're curious, that when we have the ability to do something and we could learn something from it or otherwise find it interesting, we would do it. So right now, scientists run many simulations of many different kinds of systems. In a way, video games are simulations, and of course there's an enormous market and an enormous energy poured into video games, into designing them and playing them. And so when we consider all of that data, it seems like very likely that if a future human civilization were able to produce large-scale simulations, that they would, and that they would do that a lot, because it would be very interesting, and curious beings like us are likely to do that if they're able to do it. Bostrom does consider the possibility that these future humans would introduce some ethical restrictions on the production of simulations. You might think in particular producing simulations of conscious beings that are able to feel pleasure and pain, might be worrisome for ethical reasons. And so it's possible that future post-human civilizations would just put a moratorium on simulations that included conscious beings. And if that's the case, then maybe it's the case that there will be a technological singularity or posthumanism, but that these people that have the computing power in the future to run these ancestor simulations don't actually do so, because they hold themselves back for ethical reasons. So that's a possibility. Bostrom, and that would be a reason to say that P2 is false, and then the rest of the argument wouldn't work. Another possibility is that these future humans are different from us in certain ways because they have available to them all kinds of other experiences from AI and from these incredibly advanced computational technologies, that they may actually find something like ancestor simulations just boring, and so that they wouldn't actually produce large-scale simulations that included conscious beings. It's a little hard to imagine why that wouldn't be interesting for beings like us in the future, but we can, because we know that those beings in the future might be very different from us, that introduces some reason to doubt, that they would necessarily have the same motivations and be the same kinds of information-seeking beings that humans are today. Now, the third premise is also potentially controversial, but many philosophers and others who think hard about consciousness and how consciousness is related to, for instance, brain states or physical states in the world, would agree with the third premise here. Okay, why? because there is this view in philosophy of mind. Again, it's not unanimous, and it may not even be a majority view, but it's a common view that whatever it is that generates consciousness, it must be something or some arrangement of physical stuff that generates consciousness. Because, if we're going to think in accordance with the scientific world picture and be scientific in our thinking, then we shouldn't posit the existence of stuff in the world that's not itself physical. That is, we should say that ultimately whatever exists has its causal source and its material composition in physical things, okay? That it's somehow part of the material, physical, natural world. And if that's the case, then consciousness must be that way too. It must be generated by some arrangement, for instance, of physical matter. And so then the question is it only possible on the basis of a certain kind of physical matter, like, for instance, biological matter? Is the only kind of being that could be conscious an animal or another living thing? And I intend that legitimately as an open question. I'm not sure what the answer is, but many people would say, those who opt for this substance independence idea, would say that no, it's at least conceivable, it's possible, and it must for principled reasons be possible that something that's built out of other elements than biological elements is able to be conscious. So for instance, that if a computer had the right kind of architecture, if it was built in a way that matched the patterns of human brains, for instance, then we would have to say that computer was conscious at a certain point, or given certain conditions or meeting certain conditions, that it's possible to build conscious beings out of something other than biological materials. So that's the idea of substrate independence. And if that's true, that substance independence idea, then it's a fair prediction to say that these future civilizations with enormous computing power will be able to simulate beings like human beings well enough to have those beings be conscious, to have there be something that it is like for them. That is, that they are having experiences and that the world seems a certain way to them, just like the world seems a certain way to us. In other words, it should be possible that the kind of experience that we have when we're conscious is something that could be generated by a sufficiently technologically advanced civilization. That's what P3 says.